So I'm Christy. I don't know if I'm sure I've spoken with quite a few of you before, but I'm a quality and test consultant for expertise recruitment. So I specialise on recruiting for Manchester businesses. I am currently in sunny North Wales, actually in Pyhäjärvi, if anyone knows. So apologies if there is any background noise. I've got to turn the music down and they've been very nice so far. I'll let Mareet do most of the talking anyway. If everyone could stay muted if they can. It's always nice to see cameras on, but I understand not everyone likes that, so no problem if not. And as I say, I'll let you do most of the talking, Mareet. So if you'd like to take it away.
Sure. I'll try to hide my face so that I don't have to see myself all the time. It looks weird to be looking at oneself. So my name is Maaret Pyhäjärvi and I'm from Finland. So that's +2 hours to where most of you probably are in UK, +1 hour if you're somewhere in more like Central Europe. So it's 2 p.m. for me, whereas well, it might be a little earlier and lunchtime for you. And what I wanted to kind of share on today started from this idea that I was invited to speak in a Finnish conference that then got cancelled. And I'm disappointed in the fact that I didn't get the chance of kind of like, you know, doing the presentation that I wanted to do and kind of going through the reflection of what does my last year in test automation at Vaisala look like. So I tweeted about it and well, this meetup was kind of to first contact me and said like, hey, we can, you know, create the space for you to do what you wanted to do. And since I generally do talks kind of like out of the you know, the practical side of things, like the things that really happen in projects, I really appreciate the fact that I can do this one for you here today. The schedule, how I was kind of thinking of it, is that I've tried to put some stuff on the slides for about half an hour. And then I would hope that we can have a conversation. So again, I speak to you today and in general as a practitioner, someone who works in, you know, real projects. I don't have a consultancy. I'm not doing consulting. I'm not trying to do recruiting either. It's more of I am reflecting the work that we need to do in the organization and in the teams, and kind of look for ideas also from you on maybe I'm still missing something. Maybe you'd have ideas on how I could do things better, or maybe some of the stuff that I have already gone through would be useful to you. So again, from a practitioner's point of view. And the whole idea with this 1 year in test automation for me right now, it's been that for the last 1.5 years, when I've been in Vaisala, I have 25 years of industry experience in general. I've ended up working with a little bit different kind of software. And by a little bit different kind of software is, what I mean by that is that I don't have a web page as such. I don't have a Windows application as such. Instead, I have these very physical looking weird devices. The one on the middle there, that's a weather, WXT weather measurement instrument. So it measures wind and it measures humidity and temperature and rainfall, that type of things. So definitely an embedded device, but also that kind of, you know, the embedded device, that sensor part, it's put on top of a mast. You can see that in the other picture there. And what I've been building for the last year with the team that I work in is there's the in the middle of that, under that solar panel that you can see, we also built the solar panel. So that was also part of the things we had to build, and the whole kind of the powering system that we did for that. But there's the little box, like the brains of the weather station. That's kind of the main central part that I've been working in. And since the brains don't do much without the, you know, the extensions that you need, the solar panels or the sensors into this, I have needed to kind of pay attention to every little piece that gets integrated into this. So my world kind of looks like conversations around conversations around real firmware that is kind of, you know, just very close to that hardware, something really small that is put on a circuit board, but also for the heart of this this weather station thing. We've been building and extending the Linux operating system for embedded devices. We've been building applications on top of it, and we have web user interfaces on the actual device, but also it sends stuff over to the cloud. So there's been also kind of cloud software that I've needed to work with. And for me, kind of like, when I joined Vaisala, I was told that, if you haven't worked with embedded software before, this is going to be so different. And in the last year and a half, I've come to the conclusion that the difference is that we talk about all those lovely layers of the rainbow. Like we really quickly in the same meeting might go from, talking about how the gates and registers are done and how things are connected physically into talking about the whatever user interfaces we have. So the range of things that come to you is kind of a big one, but also I really like the post on last week on being strategically ignorant. So just, decide I'm not paying attention to all of the hardware details, and the world suddenly looks very much like it does on the regular software side. So I don't think this is so different, other than the fact that some of the hardware parts mean that we need to build hardware in order to do test automation into these systems. So we'll talk about that a little more. The system in how we do automation looks pretty much kind of like on a high level scale like this. We usually have a Linux PC, control PC of some sort, that is connected to the whatever device we are testing right now. We call that device under test. DUT is the word that we're using. It's usually connected with USB into that. It also usually has some kind of like a more standard TCP/IP, UDP type of connection. You can put an SSH connection into that, or you can at least send stuff over the serial using the same kind of control mechanisms. From the control PC plugging into, there's usually a maintenance connection of some sort. But similarly, also from the control PCs that we use, we have also other hardware PCs that we can control. One of them we call Katri. I think that's a bit more of a kind of like specialized terminology within the company, in the sense that it's just a physical board that allows us to do physical world phenomenon. So for example, one of the things we do with that is that if we want to reboot a device, like we do a quick reboot that restarts the device, that's something we're able to do, kind of like simulating a press of a button. Or similarly, if we do a long reboot, keeping the button pressed for like 10 seconds, that basically resets the device back to the factory installation settings, and we can also do all of that programmatically. So what we basically just have on the automation side is a lot of different kind of testability pieces and programmatically control. And what we've been using mostly in our tests is two different frameworks. We've been using robot framework, so that kind of comes into play a lot in this particular environment, but also recently we're using just pure Python a lot in doing the exact same kind of things. And for Python, then using various libraries that enable us to just reuse stuff that somebody else has created, just like the robot as an environment has provided for us. If there's anything kind of special about this setup, it usually is the fact that me coming from, again, creating cloud software or Windows software and pipelines for kind of very modern automation before this one, it feels like I went back 15 years time in some ways, because now I need to accept the fact that mostly we're able to run our new builds and build automation only on a nightly cadence. I can't get it to run yet on every single pull request. It takes a lot more work to build those farms that we can either virtualize or share in ways that would enable the even more modern way of doing test automation. So a lot of the automation stuff that we built is kind of running on a nightly cadence. And when you're used to having the feedback at your fingertips in your previous projects, it really felt like time travel when I joined this project a year and a half ago. or this organization a year and a half ago. Looking into kind of the history and what has happened in the last year in particular, the history in this particular company on test automation is that long, but it's still fairly long. So about 10 years ago, the first people in Vaisala were starting around using test automation for system level testing. So unit testing has been around a little longer and actually has grown on the side of this into a real practice that I think we can rely on a lot more nowadays than we used to in the old days. But with the system level automation, about 2010, people started kind of building the first test automation systems here. And then they kind of ended up with Robot Framework, and Robot Framework has this special IDE called RIDE, Robot Framework IDE. And that's basically, it's like the, well, if you're used to Selenium, the Selenium IDE, where you can record things and you can combine things on a very, very simple user interface that is intended for people who don't know programming. That's kind of where we started off. Test automation was done by a specialized person, and test cases were very much kind of still existing. So the first 5 years was kind of introducing people who would start working usually alone in their own repos on test automation. So now going back and looking at what we have a lot of these individual person has been keeping a repo for 10 years of corners in the organization. About 5 years ago, then they recruiting with a little bit different profile, I would say. So they started recruiting these test automation people as the only people who would join the new development teams. So no longer test cases were a part of it necessarily. So they went for this idea where kind of everyone who is part of the teams is usually doing test automation related work. But also then when that started becoming a thing, the hiring also changed so that we started to have teams where there's no test automation people whatsoever, but the developers are actually taking care of the entire thing. But all of this history, kind of looking back at time, the 10 years of time, it's usually been a single person up until the point when developers started co-owning automation. It's been a single person solo doing test automation. And with the project that I joined a year and a half ago, the end-to-end system, I started first on the cloud side, and for the last year I've been looking at the embedded side. It was kind of clear that we will have a group of at least 5 people sharing that test automation, and a team of 15 people who will be kind of benefiting from the immediate use of that automation. So the scale started growing, and we needed to figure out how to actually do this and resource this properly. And we've been recruiting people who are system testing specialists, but everyone can also write automation. So we expect those 2 roles combined, and the developers regularly pitching into this automation. But kind of looking at the time of me seeing this and having a view into what we are changing and what we're building. When I joined a year and a half ago, I felt really, like I already said, I felt like I went in time. So I came from FSecure, a company that does Windows applications, and we were doing continuous every 2 weeks releases there for about 1.8 million users at a time. So imagine test automation had to play some kind of a role in being able to do that quite safely. And then joining Vaisala for me was kind of like looking at a team doing these embedded devices, where my first task with the team was to do a retrospective with the team, because they had just a very, I would call it a painful release. At least it was painful for the product owner. That's why he called me in and said, can you look at how we're doing and maybe help people figure stuff out? They had just done 34 days of release testing. During they basically quickly dropped all of their automation and automation work. They didn't even have time to maintain it because release testing had taken so much of their effort. And they had basically been discovering the tests they needed to do as they were kind of moving along the release making. They didn't find that much problems necessarily. It's just that there were so many things that they didn't kind of plan for or understand in making of the releases, that the first thing that kind of left the team in that moment for that month and a half, all of the test automation work. And it feels kind of sad to notice that that's happening. So I looked at the team and I looked at the challenges, and we kind of concluded together that we had a few things that we needed to fix in that team, working together with the developers, working together with the system testers in that, and the product in particular. The strength of the team was clearly that the testing, actually, the system testing that was being done wasn't necessarily so needed. They didn't find much of the problems, and customers apparently weren't finding much of the problems because there yet wasn't so many of the customers. But the developers kind of didn't leak basic problems so that test automation work or testing work needed to find. So the basis of doing good unit testing was already in place. But there were a lot of other challenges. So they were leading things based on test cases. And when I say test cases, I mean test cases with step-by-step instructions on what to do. And that wasn't a very particularly good way of working. Then they were doing Agile, feature by feature, kind of adding into the existing system, but it looked more like, I call it like a leaky feature waterfall. So in the end, when the developer was done, that's when they really started working on the automation and testing, and they had kind of like change of priorities on whether to do automation or whether to do it only manually. And the end result was that if there was problems, they would never find it. Someone else would find it afterwards. So why it was also leaking. The corona started about them, the whole remote work completely threw the team off. They didn't really talk much. They didn't have much of channels. Well, nowadays we talk a lot on the Teams channel. We do a lot of kind of screen shares. Let's code together. Let's create automation together. None of that existed then, so needed to be kind of built into the system. The whole culture was around, if you say I need to do that task, I will do that task. Tasks were created by someone other than the person doing them. And there was this whole separation of and test automation. So all of these were recognized as things we did not want to have. So what we changed then first, or actually throughout the year, was that I changed teams. I was in another team first, and my team had a single tester, me, and 3 developers. And it seemed like for the success of the entire end-to-end system project, it's better for me to move into this embedded part, the heart of the weather station, that team with the other 5 testers, system testers that were there. So I took the lead, not really officially, there's a lead tester in that team, but I side by side with the lead, and as someone who is a principal level, kind of like a more experienced person, even if there's someone else to lead, I kind of implicitly joined leading the team in that sense, and started behaving as if, like, I had also things to contribute in the team. Then we started doing changes on the release process as such. So we started making agreements on releasing with the test automation only, no matter how little or how big it was. Actually, it was kind of little in the beginning. We would release basically, or the release testing would happen by only running the automation and adding 1 day of work on top of running automation and analyzing the automation. And all the other testing, we called that feature testing, happened kind of before that. And as part of feature testing, we have definition of done include, based test automation improvements that we could scope for that particular feature. Then when we had previously been leaking a lot of testing work that made automation creation difficult for the team, we listed all of that as kind of like title level only test cases. And instead of the system testers testing those things, we asked help from the rest of the team, and all of the developers were really excited in getting to kind of play with the entire system and take in features and test them. And they found quite a relevant number of problems that the testers hadn't found when they had been kind of juggling the automation and the other things and trying to figure out what the features were. So kind of not moving that information away always from the developers, but giving developers time to do some of the testing resulted in really good results. Then we started doing more frequent releases. So first it was 34 days when I started off with the team. Then it got to 12 days, then it got to 4 days. And now for last 2 releases, it's been 2 work days to release. And nowadays we release 2 products at a time instead of 1 product at a time. So we've been definitely getting a lot better at that work, kind of just organizing the work better and relying on test automation existing and being built as part of the process into that release decision making. And another thing that needed to happen kind of on a strategic level is agreeing that the test automation running environments are not free game for anything anyone wants to do on any of the days without communication to the others. So all of a sudden, some of the tests, you could actually run them on the environments because it wasn't so that someone had again changed it so that it was running a completely different version. So kind of rules around how we use our shared environments were placed in there. So that's the strategic side. And then the year of making, I think we 6 releases in that year, last year, if I count correctly, 6 releases, made tens of features. So we never got to kind of stop with the release making and stop with the improvement or stop with the feature making so that we could do some kind of like a concerted effort in improving automation. We've been doing all of it kind of as part of the work we were already doing to make those releases. I thought it was interesting to look at what did we do in that year. So the first thing kind of like that I noticed that happened in that year is that the conversation started to formulate around this idea that we can't change things for the better if we don't change anything. So unless we would do pull requests and get them approved, and unless the automation was somehow changing, we couldn't expect it to get better. So that started to kind of drive the conversation and drive the design of who would do what next so that we would continuously be improving and extending and making our test automation more reliable. So the avoidance of it must be someone else's problem, we got kind of like a nice, positive way of figuring out how to get away from it by talking around this idea that we are all contributing by pull requests. And if we notice that someone of us wasn't making pull requests, we could be kind of having those conversations on like, hey, maybe pairing would be appropriate or something like that. Then we had, over the last year, we had 3 different developers as kind of like full-time contributors to test automation. So sometimes there was more work than still with all of the other things we kind of strategically tried doing. There was too much work for the testing side. So we had developers contributing to test automation, and with the idea that when they then went back to the application development side, they knew the test automation system and continued contributing for whatever features. So we got 3 through this kind of a round of 3 months in test automation, and then going back to being a regular application developer, except now you can also do the automation part. And that seemed like a really good practice, a working practice for us. Then also kind of naturally what happened over the last year is that we had a bit of a change in people. So we had some consultants in the team who decided that they would be focusing their efforts elsewhere. So we found new consultants into the team. And when you have new people, you usually also get new ideas. And when you have multiple people with new ideas, those ideas turn into a practical implementation. So some of the things that we really got together because of the change of people in the team was this idea that exploratory testing and test automation are actually the same thing for us. There's a lot of the things we couldn't do exploratory testing for without using automation as a starting point for it. So we learned to talk about testing, kind of test design, and looking at things and pairing on things in a kind of like an unseparable thing. There's no separate kind of like here's where we do manual testing, but it's all framed around automation is what we will leave behind. That's our documentation. Then we got the idea of working towards a green radiator, kind of getting people rallying up to that cause, and to separate the feature testing, kind of like when is a feature done, testing is included in it, and we won't be leaving that stuff kind of for the release testing timeframe. So that was more like a communication improvement in the team. And we managed to add some nice things into our test automation system. Particularly now we no longer manually scripted Jenkins jobs, which or manually configured, which we had a year ago. I'm much happier for the fact that that it's now all going through the pull requests and it's all visible. It's something a lot more concrete for all of us to share. We introduced using Allure, which is a test reporting framework on top of robot framework that gives us a nicer reports. Especially the aspect of reporting that Allure gave us was this idea that we started seeing kind of out of all of the previous Jenkins runs, we started now seeing when was it last working or when did it start failing. And it made a significant difference in our ability to kind of understand what might have broken things. So kind of that loop got a little better. And then working with robot framework, we started also experimenting with what if we would use the unit testing tool, the PyTest with Allure, to actually running all of our test automation. So what if we remove the layer of the robot tests? Would that make things better for us? And we had a summer employee this summer who spent half of the summer on PyTests, half of the summer on the robot tests, and their conclusion was that it was definitely a lot better and easier experience, and the results also show it that it was a lot better experience to kind of just learn Python and move forward from that perspective. So that was something we did in the year as well. I took some screenshots so that I can show you some things that are kind of like more concrete and practical here. So you can see the yellow parts there, there's unimplemented and missing tests. That's a practice that I started kind of building in where you could find all the so-called currently manual test cases all in the frame of the automation. So we kind of brought it all into code and pull requests, and that helped us communicate on the level of the code a lot nicer. So you could find to-dos, which were not yet completed, but also we introduced this idea of unfinished tests, things that were failing, like they were not reliable enough. So we would categorize them differently in our reports. And if we had bugs that needed to be fixed, they also got categorized differently. So overall, in a year, I had a screenshot a year ago, and I have a screenshot right now on the level of placeholders, things that something to test. Well, at least we've added some things, even though we still feel that there's way more to do. And for all of you to get an idea of what does robot framework tests look like, they generally read very much like English. They're kind of pretty, but the challenge with robot tests, at least for us, is that creating one takes a relevant amount of time. The debugging tooling isn't the easiest one, and that's why we're kind of moving towards maybe Python and probably doing BDD related layers if we want to have kind of readable easily readable test cases on top of Python. But right now, no one is interested in reading this anyway, so we don't really miss it reach to a non-programmer aspect as much in the team. Also in the year, we kind of ended up retraining our management a little bit to expect that test automation and other testing are not two separate things, but they are the same thing. And we talked around the releases, we talked about kind of like the idea that you should expect that the number of our test cases is growing. It's not sufficient. We can't tell you a number that will give you a good sense of coverage. But if we are not making progress, you will not see a better state in the team. So that was kind of coming through the continuous releases for that. And then in the team, we also kind of looked at some of the things we were doing as kind of these hats, different kinds of roles that people ended up doing on different days. So everyone was kind of doing all kinds of things. But some people were clearly stronger on, for example, hardware prototyping related work, and would kind of take the lab technician type of role a lot more. So understanding people's competencies and specialties in more detailed level happened in the year. And then finally, how things kind of continue from here is that are now looking at things kind of across the whole organization, not only with this one team of 5 or 15 people, depending on how you want to calculate it. And we are finding that there's a lot of commonality between our different teams, and that 10 years of history is still ahead of us to actually harmonize in the organization. And we started this kind of like a demo, your best things, the things that you're most proud of in the organization. We also noticed with the recruits that we really need to strongly encourage in the organization this kind of like an external view of people who are doing good stuff in automation elsewhere. For example, this whole kind of green radiator, that's like a huge thing for my team right now, that we've managed to get to that in the year. I've been working for the last, 5 years in teams that don't care about radiator, because you basically see every pull request, if it stays green, fine or not. You don't need to look at test automation separately. So I feel like we're still some 10, 15 years behind some of the others, model-based testing, some of the tooling for virtualization. There's so much work ahead of us in that space, and we need to start looking at that actively. Also, I feel like we are in the path of changing our robot framework toolset that keeps us a little in the old world into this programmer and maintenance friendlier toolset. So basically, that's just removing robot framework and going into pure Python, which is how we extend robot framework anyway, but we just wouldn't be having as many layers there. Learning testing and test automation both together, kind of like in the frame of test automation, working in that frame. That journey continues, and I know that I will have to fight with my team a few more times at least. The idea that we will be releasing monthly, and this is non-negotiable. The practice of 1 year and 6 releases is not yet fully solidified, and all of this kind of reminds me of the fact that you can change things while running the projects, but changing the lessons that people have acquired over years and years, unlearning some of the previous understood concepts, it takes a lot of work. So also only time will help in solving that. So that's kind of what I had, and I was hoping we could have a conversation.
Thank you for that, Maaret. Brilliant slide deck as well. Love some of the visuals on that. I'm sure that took some time to put that together. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pipe up now and ask directly.
And if you don't want to open your mic, you can just write it. We can also read it. That's fine. But of course, we would love to also hear your voices if you're comfortable with that. Does any of this ring a bell to you, like similar experiences? Anyone?
Yeah. Hi, Mareet. I think we met at a few test conferences over time. I think we've even shared a Nando's at one point. I suppose a question I've got is, during your presentation, you used a statement. I think you used it 2 or 3 times. Test automation and exploratory testing are the same thing. Could you elaborate for those on the call exactly what that means? Because people like myself see them as different things, but I think you've got a different take on it. Could you bring it to life for us?
Yeah, this is actually something that I've been working for, like maybe last 5 years, kind of the realization that when Ken Kainer originally called exploratory testing, he described it as kind of the smart way of doing testing where you have agency in the sense that you don't separate test design and test execution. You need both of them to be able to learn. And what I look at as my kind of realization into that, on top of that, is that the same thing, the same agency gets lost if you separate test design for automation and running with automation. Kind of like automation does the same thing for agency. So you never have good enough collaboration that the people who don't do automation would actually be able to do the best testing they should do if there's that separation. And I've spent the last 5 years basically undoing that separation for myself and undoing that separation of teams and training people into the idea that we can actually do both of them at the same time. Automation is something within exploratory testing that it kind of like, it's like a spider web. It calls you in when it fails, and that's where exploration starts. We call it debugging, but it's actually exploratory testing. We are trying to figure out what's the reason and what is this automation teaching us. But also automation is kind of like taking us to some kind of a starting point from which we might want to kind of, manually, I call it attended. We want to do attended testing forward from getting to a really complicated setup with automation and then just checking something there that we found hard to get right into the automation script. So in many ways, kind of when you end up separating them, you end up creating a worse experience of testing. And I feel that contemporary exploratory testing, as I frame it, is this idea where you fight against the separation so that you raise up agency. But it also then means that you need to build the skills in people. And you don't need to know everything about automation to actually already work on automation. But daring to build text that is in that format is already a great start for a lot of the people that I work with.
Great answer. Can I also give a shameless plug to your Slack channel that you've started, the exploratory testing Slack channel, which has got some great stuff around unit checking and testing, TDD, BDD. I've already found it really interesting. So there's a shameless plug for your Slack channel.
All right. It's great that someone else has shamelessness when I don't.
Cheers. Thank you. Great talk, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah. So again, like a lot of this is figuring things out in whatever situation you are in your companies. Like I don't believe there's like, this is the great automation looks like, or that I could get there in a moment. It's more like whatever I end up struggling with right now and actively moving things so that it's always better for the next day. Would I say that manual testing is going out of the market soon? I wouldn't say that. I would say we do a lot of manual testing to create our automation. So I think actually the really good understanding of test techniques and how do you test is coming back. And one of the troubles that we had, at least with the people specializing in test automation, were that they were developers who didn't understand testing, but they were writing test automation from someone else's command. So kind of like there's a whole different role that I use the frame of TA plus ET, like you have to put them in the same page. A lot of the people who have been test automation we ended up recruiting didn't know how to test really well. They had kind of raised up the ladders by learning to program, but they gotten how to test if they ever had known that. And right now I feel like what's coming into the market is this frame of having to intertwine the skills of thinking and automation and making choices of which tests will you leave behind as automated and what will you do as attended testing, kind of like being there to watch the information unfold. The other question was that are there some low code or no code automation tools that I would recommend to help make automation more inclusive? So for us, even in Vaisala, I have another team working in, we call it group IT. It's basically business systems, so Salesforce and SAP and that type of systems. And we hired there an automation specialist, and we have high hopes for the idea that we could, figure out a tool where all of the businessy people can end up writing automation. Yet it seems like they can take the trainings and they can just create a lot of scripts that don't really serve us well. They are not just creating this kind of like a maintenance nightmare. So even though they can do it, I don't think the creation of tests in the first place is the problem we are trying to solve in the space of automation. We are trying to solve the ability to keep them around and be useful over longer term. So I haven't really liked myself the low code ones. I have paired with 3 different business people on robot framework, creating test cases with them. And it seems that with a few hours together, they can learn to do that type of automation. So it's not actually so big of a deal to teach business people enough automation. And it depends really whether it's kind of given to you first as a, there's this fun thing we could try if you would like to learn, rather than you will be jobless unless you learn this. Like if you feel, negative around the pressure that you are being asked to learn new kinds of skills, it's probably not going to be the beneficial area for learning. But a lot of this stuff is kind of like, it's teachable, it's learnable by pairing. So for the last 2 summers, I've had a summer employee, and they both are working in the space of automation and exploratory testing combined. And they only got 3, one got 3 and other got 6 months with me and my team. And I'm really well in new jobs, new places of work where they ended up taking more salary after they got trained, which was kind of also the agreement that we had with them. So I think it's a smaller learnable thing than we give it credit for a lot of times, but it requires someone who is willing to really coach and pair and not just send people on courses and learn alone. Yeah, there's nice question of maintainability being the issue.
Now, I know you obviously mentioned about increasing ownership, I guess, or sharing the ownership of automation across the team. When you were doing that, did you face any resistance from anyone in the teams? And if so, who was that from mainly? And how did you overcome that?
I have one person who resisted still to probably to the bitter end, and he is the team's main software architect, kind of the most skilled and most fast-moving developer in the team. And he says that he doesn't want to stop for 3 weeks to learn robot framework. So my theory is that now that we've moved our tests, some of our tests on the areas that he works in into PyTest, he will just update them. So I think it's there's a frame of some tools create an extra hindrance for you in going and contributing, and some of the developers really do not like the fact that robot framework as a language is kind of cumbersome. And well, I would have to agree with them, but not everyone gets the choice of opting out of this work. But I think, again, I have another talk that I've done earlier where I talked about this idea that none of the advice I can give you on how to get it done won't work for you. I have 25 years in the industry. I've done 450 talks in various conferences and meetups over the years. I know and get to talk to CXO level people about testing in my company and in other companies. I get regularly called when someone wants a comment on how testing should be done in whatever things, especially in Finland, but nowadays also globally. And that gives me a platform where when I say something, people tend to want to jump a little higher than when someone else says it. But also some of that comes from the fact that I don't just ask people to jump, I ask them to jump with me. So I show up on a call, I share my screen, we write information together. I don't make the people do things that I don't take part in. But I definitely do have a platform that is not available to everyone else, including the fact that you could seriously considering that refusing to participate in things that I suggest in my team means that you are not very popular in the team after that. And I try to use that power that I have in a conscious way and consensual way. But I recognize that my summer employees have taught me that the things I ask for are a lot harder to get when someone else asks for them. And all I can say is find someone who has some of the power that I have and use them to help you. It's probably your product owner. So spend time with the product owner and use their voice to get some kind of, strength behind whatever you're proposing. So find a way of lending someone else's credentials. But again, being interested in this and having a hobby of researching this and trying to analyze this and trying to understand what happened, it's definitely a path that anyone can choose to walk on. So, and given enough years, I'm pretty sure that I am not the only person who has that kind of access. But right now in the current organization, it's really exceptional that I get to talk to CXO level people about testing once a month. Never had that before.
Well, thank you for that. Really enjoyed that talk. It was recorded as well, so there will be a recording available. So I'll send that over to you and post a link in the meetup group as well when it's done. We will be migrating as well this meetup group across to a LinkedIn group shortly as well. So I'll post links to that as and when. But it'd be great to see you all on there as well. But if there are no more questions, we'll call it a day there.
Well, sorry, I had one more question.
Oh, here we go. Go on, Craig.
I think one of your slides mentioned that you took the brave approach just to test the release with automated tests only. Was that right?
Yeah.
So were you at the stage where the team were quite confident they had enough automated coverage of critical areas of the system to take that approach? No.
I've done this multiple times. I've done moving teams to continuous releases 6 times now. And the first step is, even if you had single test cases automated, you just start doing continuous releases. It will fix itself. Just don't deliver it to so many customers in the beginning. So don't start with 1.8 million users, start with 1.
So you would take like a canary release kind of approach?
Yeah, kind of canary type of approach. So you give it only to some of the customers, or maybe you don't even have much of customers. In this case, we didn't yet have anything other than the pilot customers. And I was working kind of up the numbers on the pilot customers on the side of this. But just introducing the idea that how we will work, whether it's not doing any of the work, then that's how we will still work. We don't do separate extensive release testing. That's the first step.
Yeah, when I saw that slide, I thought, well, that's quite brave considering like a lot of your automated tests are still in like an infancy stage. So obviously quite high risk.
I don't think it's brave at all. And I think, again, this is a different talk which I've delivered in Applitools conference. There's the one about the continuous delivery experiences. So I don't think it's brave at all, because when you do this every single day, you have only one day of changes done. So the changes create less risk when you do it frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So